No foreign answer, no foreign answer, no. They better watch out. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Queen V.
And I'm Dr. E. Okay, all right, Queen V, what is our audacious story for today?
Our audacious story for today, Dr. E, is a story of Biddy Mason. You know, many would be stunned to find out that California had a history of slavery.
California?
California.
Okay, talk more about that.
And this woman is the audacious epitome of strength. Her name is Biddy Mason. Biddy is her nickname. She was born Bridget Mason. And reportedly, because she was born a slave, the exact dates aren't always known, but her reported birthday was August the 15th of 1818 in Hancock County, Georgia. But her exact birthplace and birth date, of course, are unknown. At an early age, Dr. E, she was taken from her parents and moved to the plantation of another slave owner. Can you imagine?
No.
By herself, little girl. Although records during her youth are incomplete, she spent most of her childhood at a plantation owned by Robert Smithson. During her teenage years, she learned domestic and agricultural skills because basically, you know, they use the slaves like chattel. They use them to grow the crops. They use them to tend the cattle, tend the children, do whatever they didn't want to do. That was a job of the slave. And so that's what she learned to do from being a young girl.
Well, let me ask you something. So why is it important that we talk about slavery? Is because after all, we're talking about audacious to believe and the audacity, but why go back into the slavery period for something that's so contemporary right now? I mean, I'm not understanding the connection.
If you understand that the audacity to believe is rooted in so many characteristics, Biddy Mason's story's characteristics go through all ages. She had to learn, Dr. E, to have the audacity to believe. And in order to have that audacious attitude, she had to be strong.
Okay.
And so
something that we have to deal with right now, but
absolutely,
that strength had to come from somewhere. And
that
so
the
Biddy Mason story, well, I understand that she was a very powerful woman, but how did she come from being a slave? I mean, tell us more about that story, because she was an amazing character.
Oh my goodness, her story is so amazing. How she came to be a slave in California is that her slave owner, along with many other slave owners, was a Mormon, and they made a trek to Utah. Now, this trek from Mississippi to Utah was 1,700 miles. Biddy Mason did that trek on foot behind 300 horse caravans. So there were 300 caravans of people and Biddy Mason and some other slave women on foot.
So they walked like the cattle.
They walked like the cattle. And actually they were behind the cattle to tend the cattle and the children. Not only did she do that, she did that with 3 children, one strapped on her back. So she had to learn from a very young age how to be exceptionally internally and externally strong.
Well, let me say this. What you're saying is really powerful, because oftentimes we go through things in our lives as we see it today, and we're ready to break down. We're ready to just fold it and say, okay, it's not easy enough, so therefore I can't, I won't, I will not, or whatever. But she kept going even despite the odds, despite walking. How many miles you say she had to walk behind cattle?
1,700. And it took them, they said, approximately 6 months. So for 6 months, she is traveling like a piece of chattel herself, no doubt, many hours at a time without rest, without proper nutrition, but she had the internal and external grit and strength to survive.
And that we're talking about just surviving. We're not even talking about thriving at this point, but just literally just trying to live. Now, what is it about Biddy that kept her going? I mean, it's my understanding she didn't quit, she didn't give up, she kept going, but what was it inside of her to keep her going?
It had to be only a strength that I believe comes from God, because the hand of God is all over Biddy Mason's story. One thing that happened is that they left Utah through the San Bernardino Mountains, these Mormons, to relocate to California. Well, that is how Biddy Mason came to California. That's how slavery was in California. She was, even though California was a free state, because her slave owner brought her here, he continued to treat her like a slave. But in the interim, this is a providential hand of God on her story. There were free African Americans, former slaves, who realized Biddy Mason's plot. And so they decided that they were going to free her from the slave master. And actually, Biddy Mason and her children, her family, were put in jail. They actually took them away from the slave owner and put them in jail to free them from him until she could go to court to claim her freedom.
So she had to swap from being a part of her slave master's entourage, family, whatever you want to call it, got put in jail to be free. I mean, in jail to be free, just to seek freedom. That's amazing. That, just to have that knowledge, to have the wisdom to know that in order to be free, you got to go get locked up in a jail and go through the court system just so that you can be free. That's some big, that's heavy duty.
Oh, her story is so incredible. And then from there, she goes on trial. I mean, she goes to the judge and everything. She and the group of slaves that were with her, and they petitioned for their freedom in California and get it. But what's even more amazing to me is what Biddy Mason did with her freedom once she obtained it. Now, because she was responsible for being the midwife, the caretaker of the children, the cattle, and all of that, she had an incredible skill set. So much so that a local physician, upon her freedom, used her as his midwife to deliver babies, and she was responsible for delivering thousands of children in LA, not in LA County. Not only that, she, through grit and grace and her own brilliance, obtained enough financial resources that she became a property owner through very expensive property in Los Angeles, was one of the wealthiest women in Los Angeles County. She founded a church. She was a huge philanthropist who they said never turned anyone away from, and they were going through devastating times. And she was responsible for clothing and feeding many as a huge philanthropist.
What I find interesting as you're telling this story, Queen V, is that she was a slave, but she wasn't enslaved mentally. It sounds like she had freedom in her mind the entire time. And even though her body was, she was a part of slavery, she in her mind said, I am not enslaved. I have a dream. I'm going to manifest this dream. I'm going to share this dream. And she aligned herself with all the right people. What was it? And I know that we can only speculate at this moment, but what was it that caused her to get with the right people? The doctor and this person and that person. How does she navigate to do that?
Well, a lot of the story is recorded, interestingly enough, and it seems that her daughter, her oldest daughter, had a young man that she was seeing. And the young man heard of the plight of this young girl who he wanted to marry. And of course, Biddy and the rest of the crew, and told his parents, who had become pretty well situated and financially sound people themselves. And they banded together a community intent on rescuing and saving them.
Wow.
So it takes a village, and the village came around, and it was just amazing.
Well, it's interesting. In our earlier episode, you mentioned that it's important to surround ourselves with either role models or people or just positive individuals that can help us get to that next level, or to keep us positively thinking about where we can be and how we can become. Biddy had something special within her, that not only was she able to be around the right people, but she shared her wealth with so many. How can we do that in today's world? What can we do to get to that audacious landing point?
You know what? There's a saying that says that life gives to the givers and takes from the takers. Mm-hmm. I think that's absolutely true. I believe personally that the providential hand of God moved so powerfully on her behalf because he knew at her very core that she was a giver. She did not allow her horrific circumstances. Can you imagine traveling 1,700 miles behind cattle? No telling that she was beaten, mistreated, talked to like, she wasn't a human being, treated like less than the cattle. But still, she didn't allow that to make her bitter. She determined it would make her better. And I believe that heart of generosity, that determination to lift up others as you're lifted up, is what really propels us to even higher heights. And Biddy Mason had that in spades. She is one of my favorite historical stories of all time. Phenomenal woman.
Yes.
Biddy Mason.
Well, Biddy Mason, she wasn't bitter Mason. Because I'll tell you, after, knowing her story, it's easy to be bitter after you've gone through so much. And it's easier to just hoard whatever blessings come your way. But you see where I'm holding my arms around myself. If you're so busy hoarding stuff, you don't have an open arms to be able to receive anything. And she was definitely a giver. And it's making me think about her amassing the kind of wealth that she did. What inspired her to give to others? Because so much was taken away from her.
I think that either, you have the choice to decide that you are going to expand yourself, or you're going to constrict yourself. Either you have an expansive giving heart, or you have a constrictive, like you said, just hoarding heart. And it's a decision. And I think that she decided, I can just believe in my imagination that during her prayer time and praying to God, that she promised him that if he ever blessed her, that she would bless others. And Lord knows that Biddy Mason kept that pledge, that she took her life and she blessed others.
Well, it's interesting when people go through trials and tribulations in life. Sometimes I've been in academia for 37 years, and you've heard of this thing called the tenure process. Oftentimes people go through tenure and they have such a terrible time getting through tenure. Once they get tenure, they send the next group through the same terrible experiences. I never could understand that. Why keep the abusive behavior going for years and years and centuries? As you probably know, the tenure process is like a hazing process for many people, or it can be just a handshake just for a chosen few. But for Black people, it's a hazing. And with only 5.5% of all professors in the nation being Black, many of us rarely get through that tenure process because it's so abusive. And so I applaud Biddy Mason for going through an abusive experience. I mean, it cannot be nothing but abuse when you're walking 1,700 miles from slavery, from the slave states to the freedom state called California, in Los Angeles, California. Am I correct? And
Yes.
and walk behind cattle with babies strapped on your back and you're holding them. I visualize that and I say, how can a person not be bitter and angry after going through that? But let me just say this, Queen V, it's stories like this that speaks to my heart in terms of audacious to believe. We have to literally tell ourselves on a day-to-day basis, in my case, an hourly basis, sometime a moment by moment basis, that we have to believe. We have to believe that things are going to go right. We have to believe that this is going to be a beautiful day. We have to believe that we can do those things that the world tells us that we can't. We have to have the audacity to believe that we can and that we're enough. And I'll say this, as a Black woman, I'm a whole person. I'm enough just as I am. I'm a whole person. I want you to speak, if you don't mind, to some of the women that might be listening that may feel that they're not enough and that they need someone else in their lives, or they need all these people in their lives to make them a whole person, to feel enough. Because I'm gonna tell you, Biddy is my new next hero. And that is because she was enough by herself and she proved that. Can you speak to that, Queen V?
Oh, absolutely. And like you said, and as an African-American woman, and I've had to spend so much of my life being alone and being a single parent and doing things on my own, that it can be intimidating in life to feel like you don't have a shoulder, you don't have, you know what, but with God and ourselves, we are a majority. And He has placed enough inside of us to be able to stand strong, you know. And I love the biblical scriptures that say, let the weak say, I am strong. Let the poor say, I am rich, because it does not matter what others say. It matters only what we say about ourselves and our circumstances. And like you, Dr. E, I have had to spend all of my life saying, I can't, I know I can't. I don't know how I can, but I know I can. And while I can, I'm going to help others when I can. And with that kind of heartbeat, God comes through every single time to send people and resources and to make His dream for your life come true.
Amen. I mean, what can I say? That is so profound, what you're just saying. And I hear you. What keeps me going about I know I can, I will, or whatever, is that my mother always told me, I was a 5-year-old kid, she always said, Marilyn, you can do anything you set your mind to. And if anyone tells you otherwise, they are telling you a lie. Don't you ever forget it. Now, here I am, 64 years old, and I'm still listening to that voice that my mother put in my head and in my spirit that convinced me at 5 years old that I can. And I wonder if Biddy had parents that instilled those types of positive words, saying, despite where we are, despite what we see, we cannot go by our feelings. We cannot go by what's in front of us. We have to go by what is embedded in our minds and in our hearts and in our spirit.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that is so powerful and so true. You know, it doesn't record, you know, and as being a young child sold into slavery, I'm wondering who was speaking into her spirit. But one thing I really believe from her story is that she received so much inspiration from the community of former freed slaves, because they were audaciously bold to believe. They're like, nope, you are not going to be a slave anymore. Your children are not going to be slaves anymore. And we are going to do all these audacious acts to make sure that you are never a slave again. And sometimes when we don't have enough strength to believe for ourselves, God will send angels and allies, as you love to say, angels and allies alongside of us to build us up and to give us a scaffolding and to tell us you can do it. You can do it. And to show us through their lives that you can do it. And that's what my prayer is, that I can always be that one to be scaffolding for somebody else to say, you know what, if she can do it, Lord, I know I can do it.
I hear you. Yeah. It has to be like that. And I tell you, Queen V, you inspire me to do it. And what I mean by it is that we've been friends for 60 years, and it's just beautiful. And to see what you've done with your your Queen's ministry, and what you're doing with your Queen Champions ministry, and what you're doing now with the podcast, because you're such a positive figure. And I tell you, I am super happy, super proud to be your friend. And you give me a reason to remind myself that we are audacious, and we have people that are watching us and that's listening to us that will say the same thing, saying, I am audacious as well. And I will get out of my house or get out of the pits or get out of whatever I am and grab what I need, because we have to work for it. You mentioned that before. In one of our earlier segments, we have to work for what we want. And Biddy, she didn't get this stuff by osmosis. She aligned herself with the right people. She labored under the correct knowledge, worked with the physician, doing the things she needed to do. Well, I'm sorry. She worked with the right people to do what she needed to do to succeed. And she just kept giving. And I do believe when you give, you shall receive. But I think it's important to not give with the expectation of receiving. We should give with a clean heart and with a heart of thanksgiving, and not looking for something in return as a result of us giving to the next person or giving to society or to groups or whatever.
I agree wholeheartedly, and that is, I think, the power, the sheer power of Biddy Mason's story is that she turned her pain into power by giving to others. She was audacious enough to believe that she didn't always have to be in her circumstances, that her history was not her destiny.
Amen. And I tell you, she, rather than getting bitter, she got better. And, to have all these properties. I mean, she was, I guess, known as like today's millionaire. Back in her day, the properties that she amassed and the things that she did, she was considered a millionaire back then. Am I correct?
Yes, she was considered one of the wealthiest women in Los Angeles, of self-made.
Wow.
And there is a park there right now from the National Park Service with her name, giving honor to her on the property that she originally bought. And if you know anything about real estate in Los Angeles, it's very expensive. So that plot of land is quite worth a lot. Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, Queen V, it looks like we are rounding this up. And what words of wisdom and encouragement can you leave our audience before we sign out?
Mine would be that, you know what, no matter what, never, ever, 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 ever give up. Never count yourself out. If God be for you, he is worth all the world against you. And Biddy, Mason is a prime example of how he comes in even when we can't see our way, and makes a way out of no way.
So you got to be audacious. At the end of the day,
audacious.
you have to
Yeah.
have the audacity to what?
To believe.
You got it. You got
Yes.
So,
yes.
so Queen V, it looks like we're almost out of time. And what I want our listening audience and our viewing audience to know, they can catch us, our next episode and the previous episodes, at Queen V and Dr. E and DrE.com. Again, that's Queen V and DrE.com. We'll see them next time. And remember, they must A to B.
To be audacious to believe.
That's right. Okay, so we'll see you next time.
They better watch out, yeah. Forget the things that they say. Look out, babe, look out. You gotta